Welcome, Margaret and Marcus.
Good evening and welcome, bienvenidos, friends of the Hispanic Society, to las Tertulias de Arte Hispano on Hispanic art gatherings. I'd like to thank our members who have joined us month after month for well over a year. I think it's actually been a year and a half. And also welcome all of those of you who are new members and watching their first Tertulia. We continue these conversations on the first Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. If you're not a member yet, please do consider joining by visiting our website at hispanicsociety.org and search for membership under support. Before I introduce Marcus, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Christina Aldrich, who spearheaded the Tertulia series with Alex Campos over a year and a half ago, I understand, and has shepherded all of us to make each and every one of these programs unique and seamless. Christina's father, a professor of Spanish at Dickinson College, even participated with his paella presentation. Christina will be leaving us, hopefully only temporarily, to focus on her dissertation at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, as well as other very exciting special projects. We're so grateful to you, Christina, for all your support as well as your friendship. This is not goodbye, but a warm thank you. So tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our senior curator, Dr. Marcus Burke, with whom I've worked for over 27 years. Many of you are very familiar with Marcus and his various areas of expertise, so I'm going to keep this short. But I've worked with Marcus for so long and consider him a dear friend, so this is really a special privilege for me to fill in for our executive director tonight on tonight's program. Marcus's curriculum is really quite impressive. He holds a BA in English from Princeton, a master's in theology and church history from Harvard, and an MA and PhD in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. In addition to his 27 years at the Hispanic Society, Marcus has worked and been involved with the Meadows Museum, the Southern Methodist Museum at the university, the Metropolitan Museum, the Art Museum of South Texas, the Davenport Museum of Art, and the Heckscher Museum of Art, as well as a whole flurry of other institutions, including, of course, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In addition to his talents as a curator, he's also served as professor of art history and taught at Yale University, SUNY Purchase, Southern Methodist, at the University of Texas, and I go on and on and on. And I should mention also the Bard Graduate Center. The title of this evening's presentation is Handsome, Clever, and Rich, Doña María Catalina de Urrutia, First Lady of Puerto Rico, 1783 to 89, portrayed in San Juan by José Campeche, 1788. After Marcus's presentation, we will have a brief conversation and invite you to submit questions and comments in the comments section of the video. So thank you for joining us, and I hand you over to Marcus. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And I must say that the pleasure is mine as well for these 27 plus years. This evening, we're going to chat about the Hispanic Society's portrait. And I'm going to put it on the screen now. Oh, I'm going to put it on the screen now. There it is on the left. It's a portrait of Doña María Catalina de Urrutia y Montoya from 1788, painted by José Campeche y Jordán, whom you see on the right. The painting is a marvelous jewel of a work on a mahogany panel about 16 inches high. So it's only about this big. And the inscription on the scroll at the lower left keeps happening, says, and can be translated in English, portrait of La Señora Doña María Catalina de Urrutia in the year 1788. Campeche, whom you see on the right, was the principal artist of 18th century Puerto Rico and a musician in the cathedral at San Juan and other churches. He lived from 1751 to 1809. He was the son of an Afro-Hispanic freedman, Tomás de Rivafrecha y Campeche, who had been the slave of Don Juan de Rivafrecha, a canon of the San Juan Cathedral. At the age of 30, in 1737, Tomás married María Jordán, a Spanish woman from the Canary Islands. Tomás was able to buy his freedom from the canon and pursue a career as a gilder, decorator, painter, property owner, and shop owner. That is, he had become a middle-class artisan and businessman who increasingly inverted his name to Campeche y Rivafrecha, emphasizing his descent, but also taking advantage of his former owner's name to keep his connections with church patronage. We know nothing of his art. Campeche presumably trained as an artist under his father, but he also developed his talent as a musician, which coincided with his father's church connections. In short, we see father and son as talented individuals who achieved notable upward social mobility through talent and industry. In 1775, Campeche's career got a tremendous boost when one of the most important artists in 18th century Spanish painting, Luis Paret y Alcázar, arrived in Puerto Rico. Paret had been what we would call collateral damage in a scandal that erupted in the household of his principal patron, and Goya's as well, the Infante Don Luis de Borbón, brother to King Charles III. Charles sent many members of the household into exile, and Paret found himself in Puerto Rico from 1775 to 1778. He apparently had a sense of humor about it, as you can see from the picture on the right. Over here, which is a self-portrait in the role of a Puerto Rican agricultural worker or jíbaro harvesting plantanos. A more typical example of his work is the self-portrait in the artist's studio on the left, which some believe was also painted in Puerto Rico, but in any case features the traditional melancholy pose with a hand on the cheek and a prominent image of a shipwreck, perhaps symbolic of the damage the exile had on Paret's career and access to official patronage. We admire the work for its extravagant Rococo colorism and energetic avalanche of details. Among the things Paret brought to Puerto Rico was an advanced mastery of Rococo female portraiture. Here I'm showing you Paret's portrait of his beautiful young wife, María de las Nieves Micaela Fordonier, painted in 1783, 5 years after Paret returned to Spain. Paret was clearly very much in love with her and proud of his ability to keep her in the latest styles. Paret taught Campeche the then prevalent Rococo style, and Campeche adopted Paret's fluid and lively yet precise brushwork and luminous colors. Campeche's small-scale portraits, especially those showing elegantly dressed ladies, are considered his most representative works. This detail of a fragmentary equestrian female portrait shows Campeche's ability to transform the Rococo tradition he learned from Paret into his own more precise style. In this case, both works are from about 1783 and relatively small in scale on hard surfaces, copper in Paret's case and mahogany with Campeche, allowing precise but fluid brushwork, tighter but still lively in Campeche's work, yielding a particularly charming result. I want to show you one more equestrian portrait as an example of Campeche's female portraiture, his close relationship to European art, and the nature of his clientele for portraits, which was entirely, to the extent we know, composed of either Spaniards and their European colleagues or criollos, that is, families of Spanish or European origin whose members were born in the New World. Campeche's training with Paré strongly reinforced this connection and indeed was what brought these upper-class patrons to him. I might add that in his religious paintings and career as a church musician, Campeche also accessed patrons that were highly Eurocentric, which is only to be expected from his father's connection with a canon of the cathedral. Campeche was an extremely devout Catholic who attended Mass every day and never married, instead devoting himself to supporting a large extended family. Combined with Paré's influence, the nature of Campeche's patrons virtually ensured that nowhere in Campeche's art, and certainly not in the Hispanic society picture, is there any embrace of art and culture beyond influence from Europe and its expression in New World Criollo culture. From one point of view, we can understand this as a type of social disconnect, the son of a freed slave moving among the highest members of society, or more positively, as an index of social advancement in spite of possible racial prejudice. But let's return to the art and to Campeche's images of women. Here on the right is the full-scale image of the fragment, and don't we wish we had all of it? Next to it is another work from 1783 showing what the whole composition would have looked like. We do not know who the sitters were. This work is now in the Ponce Museum and offers us a symphony of mauves and grays gently surrounding the elegant figure. With regard to the European aspect of the works, by the 1780s, equestrian female figures had 2 centuries of tradition and were found throughout European art, as these comparisons show from French art. And here is a picture by Louis Auguste Brun showing Queen Marie Antoinette at the hunt, also from 1783, and Spanish art, in this case, a portrait by Goya of the wife of Paré's patron, Don Luis, the Infante, Don Luis de Bourbon. But there is something more reserved in Campeche, perhaps even more classical, which we might expect from this solemn self-portrait, even if we only know it from a later copy. We can perhaps feel something of the church musician's discipline in Campeche's works. The Hispanic Society's painting depicts Doña María Catalina de Urrutia y Montoya as she was in 1788. She was born in Havana, Cuba in 1749 into a highly important Criollo family. Her father, Bernardo de Urrutia y Matos, was a jurist, professor of law at the university and mayor of Havana, who died in 1752. He was born in Havana. Her brother was also a jurist and professor. The work has a provenance to the Ramirez de Villa Urrutia family in 19th century Havana, Cuba, so it seems to have been painted for the family. In 1766, at the age of 17, Doña María Catalina married then Colonel Juan Andrés Daban, a military officer and administrator who was part of a reform movement in the 1770s, cleaning up the administration of the Spanish Empire. She was 17, he was 42. However, the marriage seems to have been a good one in both social and personal terms. The couple had 13 children, 9 by the time the Hispanic Society portrait was painted in 1788. Doña María Catalina is obviously in tremendous shape for a woman who already had 9 successful pregnancies. Eat your heart out, Jane Fonda. Daban's resume is pretty impressive. I won't go through all of it, but I do want to underscore the reform aspect again. Daban was brought in as governor and captain general of Puerto Rico in 1782, an office he held until 1789. There were family connections involved. The year before, in 1782, Doña María Catalina's uncle was sent to Puerto Rico to clean up a political and church governance mess, and Daban was to make this reform attitude permanent. He was promoted to field marshal, a rank between a brigadier general and what we would call a two-star general or major general. Here I am comparing his uniform to the sash of the Duchess of Alba, which she wears in our portrait by Goya, and which was the sash of her grandfather, a two-star general. The military note is common in even secular portraiture at this time in Europe and the Americas. The promotion of Daban was an indication of how important his reform function was to Spanish imperial authorities. Puerto Rico was a presidio, or fortified location guarding the northern approaches to the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. Backed up by Havana, it was essential to Spain's imperial defenses. The governor's mansion is built into the southern part of the fortifications called La Fortaleza. This is where Doña María Catalina presided over the Daban household and served as hostess for their social events. We know a lot about the decor of the main salons from Campeche's portraits of a series of governors and their families, including, as you can see, children. On the left is a detail from the Hispanic Society portrait. And I'm showing you over here the detail in the back, showing the Régence boiserie on the walls and the Louis XV side tables. The boiserie also appears in the center portrait of Daban's successor in the middle, and a later portrait of two sisters, daughter of the governor in 1797, when their father successfully defended Puerto Rico from a large British invasion. Here you can see the rooms as they look today, after they were redecorated during the reign of Queen Isabel II of Spain in the 1860s. If you compare the detailed view on the right from our portrait of Doña María to the furniture and the mirror, in this case in the room, you can see that the Neo-Rococo decoration of Isabel II maintained the more delicate upper register of design over the heavier Louis XV tables. By the way, Campeche painted or repainted a second version of the Hispanic Society composition, apparently between 1788 and 1799, to judge from the two inscriptions on the picture. It is in the Museo de Arte de Ponce in Puerto Rico, an institution with which we at the Hispanic Society feel a special kinship. Campeche has added a little sun on the bottom right. Over here, looking like Goya's boy sitters of exactly the same time. He holds a baton, referring to his father's baton of command. So we have the father and the son, intended, no doubt, for the military. And this, Governor Daban was called back to Spain in late 1789, presumably going ahead of Doña María Catalina and the family. So she may have sent this picture to show how much one of their children, born in Puerto Rico, had grown. Comparing the Hispanic Society panel to the work in Ponce, it would seem that Doña Catalina looks rather older in the second version, and which would confirm to the later date in the inscription. Daban died in 1793, so one wonders if he ever got to meet his son in person. Finally, all of you who have visited Old San Juan have benefited from one of Governor Daban's best ideas, using the blue stone ballast rocks from the Canary Islands that incoming ships from Spain discarded as they loaded up with New World silver and products. The wonderful hues of the volcanic paving stones on the streets and sidewalks are part of the charm of Old San Juan. The project was finished under Daban's successor. That the European ships arrived first in San Juan gave the ladies of San Juan an advantage over the women in other areas of the Spanish Empire. They were the first to know the latest fashion news. Doña María Catalina is in fact completely au courant with European fashions, wearing a French-style dress and a British-inspired hat. Here I compare her with a contemporary Goya portrait of the Duchess of Osuna in 1785, dressed in similar fashion. The Duchess of Osuna was known for her adherence to French fashion and even had her hair done, as we are informed, by one of Marie Antoinette's hairdressers. Doña Maria's jewelry style may be found on upper-class women throughout the Spanish Empire at this time. The diamond-set lozenges on black silk necklaces and bracelets were very much in fashion, as was the wearing of 2 watches. One often hears that one of these was set to Madrid time and one to the time in New World, but this, of course, is nonsense historically. Chronometers, long-distance timekeepers, were just coming into use. In any case, Doña María Catalina's watches, as you can see, are both set to the same time. In any case, we can enjoy the glamour of Doña María Catalina's attire and the luxurious setting of her home, and understand from this marvelous work of art a great deal about the last decades of the Spanish Empire and the Spaniards and Criollos who governed and led its society. Thank you. And now I'm going to stop my screen share so we can go back to our charla with Dr. McQuaid. Margaret?
Hi, Marcus. Thank you. That was so fantastic. I remember actually when we acquired the Campeche portrait, and it's still, whenever I see that painting, it makes me feel, it makes me smile. She really has some joy about all of her hair, her jewelry, the whole Rococo scene. It really makes you happy. So a few questions, Marcus. One about Campeche as an artist. As we think about his career and his journey, I'm wondering if you can provide a little bit more context as to what it means to be Afro-Hispanic or Afro-Caribbean, and how we consider, or he considered, his identity. Who were his patrons? Just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, Campeche was a person of color. In the technical language of the time, he was referred to as a mulatto, an Afro-European descent. His mother was a Spaniard, a Spanish woman from the Canary Islands. We don't know the details of his father's descent, except that he was born into servitude. The question, though, can be answered on several levels, and I'll repeat some of the things I said in the lecture. In terms of his everyday life, we have very little information on how race interacted with his life and career. Campeche was a lifelong bachelor, in part because his extended family, including his parents, at least 2 adult sisters, presumably brother-in-laws and their children, and we know he had at least 1 nephew who it was said to be an artist as well as others, depended on him to contribute to the extended family income. He was also devoutly religious, as I said, and devoted to his career as a church musician in the cathedral, in parish churches, and in convents. And we have records of this. We have his sister's testimony on his faith, his piety, and his work as a musician. We know he lived well, but he died relatively poor, perhaps because of his final illness and giving assets away to his family. Now, on a second level, Campeche's story, and especially that of his father, is typical of the upward social mobility that people of color could enjoy in the Hispanic world. The father, born a slave, able to buy his freedom, able to become what we would call a middle-class artisan and businessman, shop owner, real estate owner. This is really in contrast to the situation in the British colonies in North America and the subsequent United States, although not necessarily in contrast to the British colonies in the Caribbean. Our image of slavery, which is so much conditioned by American history and what went on in the American South, especially after the 1830s, it just doesn't apply in Latin America, which of course, basically after 1821, slavery was completely eliminated. Although that changed from locale to locale. We see something very similar in Juan de Pareja's case, where a person in servitude could be manumitted or freed by Velázquez, no less, in this case, and then become a master painter with his own shop. On a third level, Campeche is unusual in being showing or displaying an almost complete disconnect between what we today assume to be his social status and the nature of his works of art, which are either completely standard religious works or portraits and personal histories of members of the upper classes and official administrators. We could call him the court artist of Puerto Rico. We have to compare him to John Singleton Copley in Boston, or Gainsborough and Reynolds in London, or Goya in Spain before about 1800. This contrasts with Pancho Fierro, another middle or upper middle class person of color, 2 generations later in Republican Peru, who included Afro-Hispanic persons and their world and culture and confraternities and parades during Holy Week into his watercolors, along with the entire culture of Lima of all ethnic origins in the mid-19th century. But with Campeche, it's all upper class, all European.
Marcus, and also turning to the sitter, I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit about the background of the family, where they came from. Were they from Puerto Rico? I think you mentioned a little bit about, Havana. Just wondered if you could.
Well, they were from Havana. I was asked this question, and I went and looked up the father. He was born in Havana as well. So he was a Criollo, someone of European origin, born in the New World. I couldn't find her mother's origin, but they were all upper class, landowning, but also urban Cubans, colonial Cubans. But the father was a really important jurist. He wrote books on imperial law. He served as a mayor of Havana and a lot of other important functions. His wife's uncle joined him and a number of other people, many from the family, in trying to clean up the act of imperial administration. And the American Revolution was a big beneficiary of this. The Galvez brothers, who had the Army and Navy really running like a Swiss watch, and in alliance with the French, who patrolled what we call the Middle Atlantic states, they completely kept the British out of the Caribbean, and helped with a number of important things in the American Revolution, hence Galveston in Texas. But to get back to the family of Doña María Urrutia, her brother was a jurist, her brother was a professor. They were intellectuals. You might say that she was well-read, well-bred, and well-fed, and in pretty good shape. But I think that the point is that this shows us something about at least the upper levels of society, and also about the way that this society had a lot of justice behind it, that it wanted a clean, non-corrupt government. It wanted a clean, non-corrupt church. It didn't want what they call simony, with people being on the take. And boy, not Daban, but 2 governors later, just kicked the British out of Puerto Rico in a really humiliating defeat. I mean, they did it right. And I don't know anything about her upbringing. I mean, you're married at the age of 17. She wouldn't have left much of a paper trail before she got married. But I guess by the time we got her husband was, in his 60s, by the time we see the pictures come on the scene. And it really, she made the marriage work. She was obviously elegant, and she was obviously someone who, it seems to me, implicitly, was very much in control of the household and had learned that from her parents' family, who were very much in control of Havana.
Well, that is for sure. So one of the things that, I was so glad that you pointed out some of the furnishings and the paintings, and it just reminded me of the exhibition, the Rococo exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt years ago. Unfortunately, we didn't have this painting when they did that exhibition.
Oh, yeah,
it would have been interesting to include it. You and I have talked a lot about kind of how this style kind of really spread so far. But I wondered if we could return to the frame for a moment, and if you could speak a little bit to, because I know that's something that was important to you. If you could speak a little bit about that.
I'm going to share the frame. I just want to point out Régence, or Regency, is early 17th century, beginnings of Rococo in France. Queen Anne is sort of the parallel British style, a little bit later. And then we have, after that, Louis XV, Louis Quinze. And actually, in the portrait of Deban's successor, he has a really classicizing Louis XVI table he's working on in the room with the Louis XV furniture, so that we get, but obviously Puerto Rico was right up to date, as was Mexico or Peru at this time, probably Buenos Aires as well. But let me share the screen again. And
Now that would be great, Marcus.
Here, I'm going to show you the, oh, sorry. Now, I'm going to show you on the right, the detail of the, what's going on? Go back. Of the boiserie. This is, here's a painting on the wall. Here's the interior frame of the painting and two exterior frames. Notice they're delicate and do a kind of almost a musical composition back there, which once again, Campeche picks up. The image on the left is too pink. I'll get back to the proper image of the picture, but you can see how he picks up on those mauves and roses. So here we have the Régence, and below it is the Louis XV commode. But what we decided to do was to imitate the forms of the Régence boiserie, the woodwork on the wall, to make the frame. And this is actually our design for the frame, which we sent to the frame maker. When we got the frame back, this dark field in here, we toned it a little bit more mauve because it was a little too aggressive. And I think you can see that what we're doing is like putting a loudspeaker on the image, taking a compositional device within the picture and using it to invent a frame that would be similar to what she would have used in her own house. But I really feel that this pink slide, which was just to get the frame maker something to work from, and boy, they did. It was AP Munn, and they did a fantastic job on it. It was completely hand carved, completely free form. But I think here you see the mauve colors interacting with this very light alizarin, what we would call alizarin crimson rose madder, Titian-esque curtain. And there's the pink of her roses, the blush on her cheeks, the roses up here, the mauve, and all this wonderful interaction with the gray forms and the gold of the tables with the leaf on them. It's really a very nice symphony of colors, extremely typical of Campeche's mastery. Now let me stop the sharing.
Well, thank you, Marcus. We often don't have a chance when we do these presentations, we don't often show the frame. So I really am happy to, even though it's not the original frame, I think you really hit it right on the ball with
The frame's down in Houston at the moment, so I can't just go snap
Yes,
a shot.
no, I think it's great. Okay, one last question, and then we'll turn to our, well, why don't we go ahead and Christina, do you have any questions from our audience?
Yes, and thank you both so much. And thank you for the introduction, Margaret. Our first question for Marcus is, how prolific was Campeche, and did he lead a workshop?
Yes and yes. Campeche was active until 1809, so he really was in the what we call Empire or neoclassical period. He, by the end of his life, people from Venezuela to Louisiana and all over the Caribbean were asking for portraits from him. He was the dominant artist of the Hispanic Caribbean in the last 3 decades of the 1700s and first decade of the 1800s. He left a great many works. The catalog of his works that was done when there was an exhibition shared between the Metropolitan Museum and the Museo del Barrio about 20 years ago. That catalog had about 40 works in it. I should think that the total is well past 60. As for his shop, we have a beautiful painting of a bishop saint, Saint Ambrose or Saint Augustine, on a mahogany panel, very close to Campeche's style, but not of the quality of his hand. And one of my colleagues has suggested it might be his nephew, who there's some reason to believe worked with him as an artist. I don't have a lot of documentation on that, but the point is he produced a lot of works, but we also know he did other things. And because he was so busy as a church musician, he must have had people helping him set up the panels, sand them, prepare them with a ground, and the usual helper. And as is thought, at least one family member who may have worked with him in an artistic capacity. The problem is, as we go past 1809, we go in a period where the history of Latin America is very complex. And of course, at that point, with Puerto Rico and Cuba become staging areas for Spain's attempt to hold on to their other Latin American colonies, especially Venezuela, Colombia, with their rebellion, Peru, and it is Mexico later in 1821, and then in the 1820s, the revolts in Peru and Chile and Argentina and so forth as well, so that we kind of lose track a little bit of the culture there. We have some nice lithographs and drawings and so forth. I'm not very well informed on his artistic successors, but we really are going into an entirely different era, the era of romantic portraiture, of Empire, increasingly influence out of New Orleans, which of course very quickly will become, it was Spanish, and then it was French, and then it very quickly it will become for the United States before 1814, and so forth. So did I answer the question? I kind of
Yes.
so many tangents.
You really also answered the following question. I don't know if you want to add anything else to this, but the question is, Campeche seems to dominate the discussion of art in Puerto Rico during the Spanish colonial period. Were there other painters working at the same time on the island? And was there a next generation of artists that was influenced by him? So you touched on this, but I don't know if you'd like to add it.
My Puerto Rican colleagues can find nobody in the 1770s who could have been his master, other than from a documentary point of view, his father. They've found one pulpit that he may have gilded. Otherwise, I think there's a whole lot to be done there. Personally, I have to confess my ignorance of that. I simply do not know. The fact is, just like Velázquez in mid-17th century Madrid, for a long time, Velázquez's brilliant star eclipsed everything else. And I think now, I'm sure they're graduate students beginning to dig in the archives and see what they get. I'm sorry, I simply don't know. I think especially at the end of his career, there seems to be more than one hand active in this portraiture, and separating Campeche from these other hands is something that I'm not sure has been successfully done. But you see portraits emerging all the time. There's one just emerged in Birmingham, England, and they would suggest that he had a style in the 1800s, this Empire portraiture. The women are all in, Empire line dresses, and the costumes and the fashions are all of a piece. But it seems to me at this point to be still very fluid.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcus. One other question from a member who says, I thought I had seen her portrait, so this sitter's portrait, in Havana in the governor's house. Am I misremembering this? And could you explain again why the two watches? Oh,
well, it was just a fashion. Symmetry, I don't know. But in almost every portrait I've seen, they're set to the same time. And there's not a 12-hour difference between Europe and there. But it was absolutely the best they could do is guess. I mean, I think by this time they were beginning to have a fairly good idea of what we call longitude, that is, the north-south parallel lines. But I think it wasn't the early 1780s that Captain Cook began taking Harrison's chronometers with him, and they were working, and they were able to know exactly where they were, so they wouldn't run the fleet aground. But a woman's stopwatch could never keep that kind of time. You understand what I'm saying? There may be some other example to it. There may be a allegorical thing, Tempus Fugit or something like that. But you find these double watches very commonly in the last 2 decades of the 1700s in female portraiture. And a lot of people have run aground trying to explain it, and I'm not going to try. Discretion is the better part of valor.
Thank you, Marcus. Another question we have is about the conservation work. So you mentioned some of the work done on the frame.
Yes. I would like to say something. The work was acquired by a wonderful, reputable dealer in Madrid. And then Helena McCormick, our emerita senior conservator of paintings, took it. And what had happened was that the mahogany panel, I'm going to come up here, has a very, very almost microscopic wave to the surface. And over the years, varnish had accumulated in the valleys. And so she had to very carefully take the varnish layer back to where she left on an old original surface, and then saturate it with new varnish so that this beautiful jewel-like character came out. And it was enormously successful, the conservation. I might say she was the person who put the final patina on the frame as well and helped me with the design of it from top to bottom. She and I calculated that we've put over 300 frames on paintings at the Hispanic Society in the last almost 27 and a half years. So that she was someone I worked very closely with, and I want to give a shout out to her for the conservation of this work, which was a delicate, very careful sort of thing. Whenever you're working at that wonderful small scale, you have to be so careful. And she is one of the most conservative conservators I have ever known, who is so careful never to go too far.
Thank you, Marcus. We just have a couple more questions. One, I just want to go back to one of the questions before the question about the two watches. And that was, do you recall if there's a portrait in Havana in the governor's?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. No, I'm extremely interested in that. There very well may be by a Cuban artist of her as her betrothal portrait or something that the family kept when she left. Since we know that this picture was sent back to Havana, maybe there were others sent back to Havana. This picture has been out of Cuba since the 1920s, I believe it was. The family was rather interesting. At one point, an Urrutia, member of the family who owned the picture, was a senator in Puerto Rico when the governor was a descendant of Daban. You get these family connections. And then just because the empire stopped didn't mean that these people left. There was just a new, new empire taking over. And may I say that I was present in a lecture in Granada when one of the most famous Spanish historians, who was an expert on legal history, was talking about a 1792 multi-volume, like 23-volume compendium of Spanish imperial law, sponsored by the American War Department in 1892. Wait a minute, 1892, 1898. Ooh, is this malice aforethought? So that these imperial changes, when the Americans came in, they brought in a knowledge of Spanish imperial law, and it wasn't just a sharp break. Whereas some of the revolutions really removed a whole group of people from the Latin American countries back in the 1820s. There is, from the history of this picture and the family, which I went into from genealogy and so forth, kind of a permanence. But whoever had that information and saw that picture, if he or she would just put in chat where we might be able to find it, I would really like to know. That's an awfully interesting thing and something I had no knowledge of at all.
Great, thanks, Marcus. And just the last question we have coming in is about the letter. Would you be able, do we know what the letter in the painting says?
No. That's what I read at the very beginning.
Okay.
It's a scroll in the lower right. Well, here, I'll share the screen again, just a minute. Wait a minute. This might get a little clunky. Hold on, I've got to. The scroll down here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
The scroll down here, which I've got to click over here to get here. It just says the portrait of Doña María Catalina de Urrutia, año de 1788. Portrait of Doña María, Señora Doña María Catalina de Urrutia in the year 1788. It has no other function. It just tells you who the sitter is. There's no letter there or any other information about her life or anything except the word Señora, my lady, Doña. Doña is an honorific title meaning her ladyship, but Señora with Doña implies that she's married, and of course she is married. She's the governor's wife. Do you understand? So it gives us information, but it's information we already knew historically.
Great. Thanks so much. Yes, thank you both again.
Marcus, thank you so much. This was such a fascinating tertulia tonight. And I know this was such an important acquisition for us at the Hispanic Society. So it gives me great pleasure to be a part of this tertulia. Our next tertulia is on October 5th, and I will be speaking about a wonderful early 19th century Mexican paper cut. Of course, Marcus, you and I have worked on that together, which is always fun. We encourage all of our listeners to visit our website for upcoming programs, including a number of events for Hispanic Heritage Month, which are coming up soon. We also have 2 exhibitions opening this month, one at the Groliers Club, focusing on our collection of rare books and manuscripts, as well as another exhibition in our East Building Gallery, and that will be showcasing our sculpture collection. So again, thank you to Marcus. It's always a treat to hear from you. And
Can I just add one thing?
sure, go ahead.
Both the paper cut and the portrait of Doña María Catalina are on our website, and search the collections. You put in either Campeche or cut paper, a whole card will come up with a catalog entry. So those of you who want more information would be able to get it there.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Marcus. And with that, I just want to say good night and until next month. Have a good evening.
Thank you.